The French Revolution set Europe ablaze. It was an age of enlightenment and progress, but also of tyranny and oppression. It was an age of glory and an age of tragedy. One man stood above it all. This was the Age of Napoleon. I'm Everett Rummage, host of the Age of Napoleon podcast. Join me as I examine the life and times of one of the most fascinating and enigmatic characters in modern history. Look for the Age of Napoleon wherever you find your podcasts.
I'm Jeffrey Rosen, President and CEO of the National Constitution Center. A few years ago, learning about the forgotten meaning of the pursuit of happiness changed my life. When the founders wrote that famous phrase in the Declaration of Independence, they meant an ongoing commitment to self-improvement and lifelong learning. This discovery inspired me to write a book, and in my new podcast, I explore the founders' lives with the historians who know them best. Plus, filmmaker Ken Burns shares his daily practice of self-reflection. Join me for Pursuit, the Founder's Guide to Happiness.
Welcome to Ben Franklin's World, a podcast about early American history with Liz Covart. The study of history is key to understanding who we are and how we can affect a better future. Ben Franklin's World will introduce you to historical people and events that have impacted and shaped our present-day world. And now, here's your host, Liz Covart.
Hello, and welcome to episode 19 of Ben Franklin's World, the podcast dedicated to helping you learn more about how the people and events of our early American past have shaped the present-day world we live in. Each week, we sit down with an historian to discuss their unique insights into our early American past so we can learn more about who we are and how we can affect a better future. Have you ever wandered around a grocery store and caught yourself wondering how and where colonial Americans purchased their food? I know I have, and I'm especially curious about the colonists who lived like I live, in a city. Colonists who lived in cities like Boston, Philadelphia, and Charleston would not have had enough land for more than a small garden, which, as you know, would not have produced all the food that a family needed to survive. Plus, there is the issue of where they put their pigs, cows, chickens, and other livestock. I mean, early on, city dwellers had enough land to keep livestock, but as time went on and urban populations grew, there would have been less space for urban dwellers to keep and graze livestock. So how and where did early American city dwellers get their food? Today, we will discuss this pressing issue with Kenneth Torino, the manager of community relations and exhibitions for Historic New England. Ken will take us on an exploration of the colonial Boston marketplace. He will reveal the origins of the Boston marketplace from the colonial period to the present, how everyday men and women bought and sold food during the 17th, 18th, and early 19th centuries, and why Peter Faneuil offered to build Faneuil Hall in 1742. It was going to be a new market house, which he proposed to build in the center of the Boston Market District, and the Bostonians nearly turned this generous offer down. But before we get to our conversation with Ken, I wanted to note that I have placed maps of Boston and pictures of Quincy Market on the show notes page for this episode. These images will help guide you so you can place streets and buildings with their geographic locations. You will find them at benfranklinsworld.com/019. Are you ready to go shopping like a colonist? Let's visit the colonial Boston marketplace with Ken.
With tidings and wisdom to share about our early American past, here is this week's special guest.
Kenneth Torino is the manager of community relations and exhibitions at Historic New England, the largest and oldest heritage organization in the United States. Ken teaches courses in exhibition planning and revitalizing historic house museums at Tufts University. He is also the organizer of Historic New England's The Haymarket Project. Welcome to Ben Franklin's World, Ken.
Thanks, Liz. Nice to be talking with you.
Now, Ken, I'm really happy you could join us because last fall I took an amazing tour with you. You led us through Boston's Haymarket, which I hadn't realized is one of the oldest continuously run open-air markets in the United States.
Yes, it is, and it's got, I think, a fascinating history.
And we're going to talk about that history because one of the things I realized as I took your tour was how little I knew about Haymarket, which I thought was amazing because I had been visiting the market since I was a little kid, and how little I knew about the early American marketplace in Boston.
Well, I hope to answer some of those questions.
Fantastic. So before we dive into Haymarket, could you tell us a little bit about your work as a public historian and about Historic New England as an organization?
Yes. Well, in your introduction, you talked a little bit about us. We own 37 historic properties in 5 of the 6 New England states. And they range from 17th century buildings, 1st century buildings, a lot in Essex County, to be exact, all the way up to Walter Gropius's modernist masterpiece in Lincoln, Massachusetts. So we have a wide range of properties which are open to the public. In addition, we do a lot of, as you can imagine, school programming and public programs. We are a membership-based organization with over 8,000 members throughout New England and across the country. And these are just people who are interested in New England history. So we have collections that belong to the houses, about 50,000 objects, and we have another 50,000 in our collections facility that we use to put out to the public in exhibitions, and that's one part of my job. And the other part of my job is as community engagement manager, and that is, kind of a buzzword in the museum field today, but I feel that it's extremely important to all the work we as public historians do, and that is to make this history accessible to the public, draw connections with the history of the past to the history of the present, and to include everyone's history and what we're talking about doing, presenting through programs, whether it be a walking tour, lecture, school program, or whatever.
And when you say talking about everyone's history, the organization has a lot of houses. Could you give us an overview of how far across New England these properties span and what type of properties are in the organization?
Sure. Well, I mentioned already there's a lot of first period houses which are particularly notable for their architecture, but we're beyond the architecture. We realize that importance, but to us, it's the story that these houses can tell. And again, how we can relate to people's lives today. I think that's key in our field. So I mentioned the first period houses, but we have a full range and a portfolio, and we're continuing to add more houses. So let's say we have the oldest house in all of New Hampshire, Jackson House in Portsmouth. We also have the Governor John Langdon's house, which is known for its incredible 18th century architecture. But up in Maine, not far away, we have the Sarah Orne Jewett house. Sarah Orne Jewett being a regional author, not as well known these days, but was a star in her lifetime. And going south, we own actually two working farms in Rhode Island, which is quite fascinating. These are historic buildings, but we're still operating them as farms today. And this is not far from Newport, one being on Jamestown. And then I mentioned we also go up pretty recently in the 20th century, but we have a few incredible Victorian houses. One in Woodstock, Connecticut, and the Bowen House, which has a fascinating history connected with the revival of the 4th of July as a holiday. And then we have just recently acquired and will open in June of 2016, the Eustis Estate in Milton, Massachusetts, which is an incredible Victorian sort of Queen Anne stick-style house on a gorgeous estate, which comes with the original stone gatekeeper's house that we'll be using actually as a historic house, but also as a study center for 19th century history. We'll also be using it for our traveling exhibition program, which, again, I'm responsible for.
So it sounds like if you are really interested in how people lived, that historic New England has a wealth of houses. And if I'm not mistaken, if I remember my fourth grade New Hampshire history class right, John Langdon signed the Declaration of Independence, correct?
Yes, he did.
So if you're a Revolutionary War buff, you can see where he lived as well.
That is true. It's a magnificent house, and we also use part of it for our traveling exhibition program. We don't have a museum per se. We own houses. We have a library and archives which are located and open to the public. Great resources on New England, the best resources in the area, and that's at our Otis House on Cambridge Street in downtown Boston. So those resources are available, and tremendous resources that we're putting more and more of those up online through our Collections Access program that we have.
Fantastic, and we'll provide links for those in the show notes. But let's bring our attention back to Haymarket. If I understand the Haymarket project correctly, you spent a year collecting oral histories and photographs of vendors and customers. Would you tell us about Haymarket and why you wanted to document its history?
Well, to me, Haymarket is something I also grew up with. My family was originally from the North End. I'm a child of suburbia, but my grandmother lived in the North End, and my father was a cab driver in Boston. And he always visited the market and brought food home from the market. And I would go in and visit the North End and remember as a child, I remember Haymarket. So it struck those chords for me. And then as I became a museum professional public historian, I worked first at the Paul Revere House, my first full-time museum job. And I frequented the market back in the, I hate to say, 70s and 80s, and have continued to use it. What I found fascinating about the market, Liz, was that there has never been a history of Haymarket. It's just amazing, and I've been speaking with other Boston historians, Bob Allison at Suffolk University for one, and he put his students out to do research on this at once and could come up with very, very little. And it's amazing to me that this has not been documented. So we wanted to do a couple things with this. First of all, we wanted to collect these oral histories and photograph it today to document it. And truth be told, a lot of people over the years, because, Haymarket's kind of gritty but charming, people have photographed it over the years. But we wanted to do a really good, sort of over the course of a year, document it, collect these oral histories, which we've had transcribed and we will make available to the public, and photograph them. So let's capture the history now, because Haymarket today is facing challenges. And as we go through our talk today, I'm sure we'll talk about some of the other challenges over its history it's faced. But we wanted to document it today because there are some big challenges facing it today, with the Boston market opening next door, the whole market district changing, a luxury hotel, condos going in adjacent to it, and so on. So that was the impetus for us doing the oral histories and photographing, but it's actually mushroomed from there. And we will be opening an exhibition of the photographs at Suffolk University in June. We will actually be doing a documentary film now on Haymarket, which will premiere at the Modern Theater in July of this year. And we are also doing a book now on Haymarket and tracing its roots, which are direct growth from the colonial markets. So that's why.
So a photo exhibition, a documentary, and a book. This sounds like a very important market. So if I recall correctly, Haymarket's about 300 years old. Could you tell us about when the market started and how and why it started?
This is really interesting because the published material about Haymarket says that it's about 300 years old. Well, it wasn't the Haymarket that we think of Haymarket today. Haymarket is really an outgrowth of the colonial markets, which do date back in that very area to the 17th century. Okay? Right now, I'm finding documentation, and I'm in the thick of it for this book right now, so this is a good time to talk, and perhaps your listeners will have some sources for me. But the first reference that I've found, actually, to the Blackstone Market. Haymarket runs along Blackstone Street and Hanover at one corner, and the Blackstone Market was 1852. Now, that's the first I've found, so not 300 years old, but it's within the market district, and it spilled onto that land, I am sure, in the 17th century when fill took place. So if we want to go maybe back in time, should we start really at the beginning, Liz, of talk about markets?
Let's start at the beginning.
Let's go there, because this is all related to the Haymarket, and it forms its history. So with the 17th century in Boston, clearly the colonists needed foods, and particularly in the winter, it was very, very hard. It was a hardship, and the first open air market was right in this district of Haymarket, and it was at the town dock, and it was sometimes called Corn Market or the Dock Market. Now, this is really over in the area where Faneuil Hall is today, and I was just looking at some early maps that show that from the 18th century, and this is where the docks were. So this is where provisions came in on the ships, like salted pork, like salted beef, porridge, coffee beans, and obviously tea, came into the colony at that point. So this was an open-air market. There was also a fish market down there. Now, this market, again, parallels to Haymarket, was at that time run once a week. Haymarket is run twice a week. But at the same time, we're talking the 17th century, you still had you had your peddlers, as was done in Europe and in England, selling foodstuffs house to house. Okay, this was common in Europe, and it happened here. In 1635, John Winthrop mentions in his diary a new market being erected to be open on Thursday of the week. And this was situated on the spot where the old State House stands, just southwest of the town dock. And this market, had, again, people bringing in supplies, including fishermen who had cod and mackerel. Farmers came down the Charles River in their boats with vegetables. And it changed into one gradually with structures during the later 17th century. Okay, so it's really interesting. These first markets were open air, and it wasn't until a little bit later that what was known as the townhouse was built, and that was erected in 1658, and it was built of wood, and right all over where the open air market had been. And it was a two-story structure. Upstairs there were courts, there was a court, library, artillery company, and so on. The ground floor was to shelter merchants. And actually, just as a little aside, my other area of research is on the history of Christmas in New England, and the first church services in the 17th century held in Massachusetts Bay were at the townhouse. So that's a little aside there. So it was the open ground floor and was sheltering them, the merchants that came in. And these things were sold at bulk at wholesale prices, which caused some problems because not everyone, individual citizens wanted to buy things at wholesale. So this created a little bit of problem, and an act was established to change that so that people could, not have to buy in bulk and so on. So that's the first market we have. And eventually the dates were changed to 3 days of the week, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. and that's in 1696. Now, you have to remember, and I'm sure your listeners know, what's happening is Boston is continuing to grow, and they needed to hold the market more than once. Now, remember, peddlers were still going door to door, and there was a lot of contention. There were peddlers who did not like the idea of these established markets because they were established and they were subject to more regulation than the peddlers were.
And they'd have to pay rent on a stall, right?
Exactly. They have to pay rent, and the town of Boston, was actually regulating these spaces. Again, parallels to Haymarket, of course. It's regulated today, and that gets us up to or through the 17th century.
So let's just take a recap here. So what we have in this early American marketplace are peddlers that are going around town. And then by 1635, 5 years after Boston's founded, they decide they need to erect a more established market. So they're going to have some sort of structure near where the old state house is today, hold their market days on Thursdays. And then as the 17th century goes on, that market kind of evolves into, a place where there's a townhouse, people can sell, rent a stall underneath and either buy goods for their families or in wholesale. But the peddlers never really die out. They just always float around town.
That's right. I mean, they don't die out until well in the 20th century. Again, parallels with Haymarket. In my oral histories, I talked to gentlemen in their 80s, Italian gentlemen who have spent their whole life at Haymarket. And in the second half of the 20th century, they were still taking push carts into the south end, and they were describing to me people throwing down a bucket on the rope and putting their money in it and pulling up goods. So peddlers, that continued into Boston well into the 20th century. So isn't that interesting?
So this leads me to a listener question. Beckett wanted to know who sold goods that the vendors offered. Were the vendors men or were they women?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. And I have to say, I don't know for certain. There is very, very little documentation on it. What I have found so far is that it seems to be the men who are selling. And that's really all I can answer at this moment, but I will keep you posted if I find anything to the different.
Are women buying in the colonial period? I know in the 19th century, women are in charge of the household and they take over most of the household buying, but are they purchasing from the male vendors?
Yes, I think that was that from my knowledge is within the woman's sphere for the 17th and 18th century. Absolutely.
That's a tradition that carries through into the 19th century. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So colonial America throughout the 17th and the 18th century suffered from a severe currency shortage. They didn't have any cash on hand because England actually had a law saying that they weren't allowed to export pounds and shillings and their hard currency. So how did the market operate when no one had any cash on hand?
Well, another good question, Liz. Again, this is based on my research. There was bartering that did go on, but there was also cash taken. So both were happening at the same time. I guess it depended on your means and what you were able to do. But just think about this. I mean, you've got basically a vendor outside with their goods, whether it be fish or corn or coffee, something imported, salted, and you have your stand set up. And in terms of people bartering, they're going to have to physically bring things to the market or to a peddler who is then going to have to carry that around with him for the day as he's moving around the city, or at your stand, you have to transport whatever you're bartering for. So yes, I have found that there definitely was bartering going on during this period, but also that there was cash paid. And from what I'm inferring, the vendors preferred the cash if they could get it.
everybody prefers cash, right? Even today, in most cases. All right, so why don't you take us through the 18th century? Tell us how Haymarket or the Boston market developed up to the American Revolution.
Yeah, and I tend to refer to this whole area that I've been talking about with Dock Square and the Townhouse and Haymarket as it's referred to today as the Market District, which in my research, again, I'm finding that this is a term that it was in the 18th and 19th century referred to as the Market District. So, by 1710, Boston's population had grown, to 12,000, making it the largest town in British North America, and it was considered the chief commercial port. So there was a good supply of goods coming in. What happens in the 18th century is that the townhouse was destroyed by a fire in 1711. And again, the hawkers, the vendors, kept up their business and expanded their business by going around the city selling everything, meat, eggs, and other goods from their carts and wagons. And that continued for a while. In 1734, there was a vote in the town to establish 3 public markets. And there's a history running through this from the 17th century that there were many people opposed to these public markets because of the regulation. It was fascinating to me because it just seems that they would be more convenient for people. You could count on them, but there was a lot of opposition. So 3 markets were established. One in North Square, the North Market, and the center market was at Dock Square, close to where Faneuil Hall is presently located, and where that earlier market of Dock Square or Corn Market I mentioned from the 17th century. And then also South Market, which was on Boylston Street, and that was near the then Liberty Tree, and currently the intersection of Boylston and Washington, and that was kind of out of the way. Within 3 years of this, 2 of the markets were dismissed, and their buildings were abandoned. This was because there was a lot of dissent to these markets. And then there's a famous incident in 1734 of the Center Market, being destroyed by a furious mob disguised as clergymen. And this was in defiance of 2 ministers who were proponents of the public market system. So they actually ransacked and destroyed the Central Market in 1737. So between that period and 1740, actually a little bit later, there are no central markets in Boston. What's happening again? Push carts and vendors are coming through the city and selling their wares, and it's Peter Faneuil who goes to the city, the town, and he offers to pay for the creation of a market house, provided it be regulated.
And if I recall correctly, that was controversial because he only won by 6 or 7 votes?
Absolutely right. Again, it was controversial because many people were opposed to this market system.
Why do you think they were opposed to the market system? Why do you think they preferred the peddlers who went door to door versus, someplace that was regulated?
Yeah, that's interesting because they had a better opportunity to barter or bargain on a price without the interference of regulations. That's why.
Get a better deal.
Get a better deal. Good Yankees.
Yeah.
Good Yankees. And I think that is the main reason why.
So please continue with your story of Peter Faneuil.
Interesting enough, Peter Faneuil offers this in 1740, and it was built by the artist John Smyburn between 1740 and 1742 in the style of an English country market. So that, like the old townhouse, had an open ground floor serving as the market house and assembly room above. And the famous gilded grasshopper weather vane on the top of the building by Shem Brown was placed there in 1642. In 1761, the hall was destroyed by fire. Only the brick wall survived, and it was rebuilt in 1762. And that remained as Boston's central market until Boston continued to grow. It remained as the central market, and by the time Boston incorporated in the city in 1822, commercial demand had grown beyond the capacity of Faneuil Hall.
So by 1822, is the idea of a central marketplace, has that fully taken hold, or are people still resistant to it?
No, it seems people wanted the convenience. There was, as far as I can find, no opposition when they wanted to expand the market. And I should say that before 1822, before the city was incorporated, the city continued to grow, and there were other markets springing up now. The markets continue to evolve. So what happens with Faneuil Hall can't take the demand, so they expand the space and they build Quincy Market. And that's an indoor pavilion of the vendor stalls, as I think, again, people are familiar with. And it was constructed in 1824 to 26 and named in honor of the mayor, Josiah Quincy, who organized its construction. And his descendant has written an excellent book on the history of Quincy Market, which I would recommend.
Can you tell us the title of that? And we'll include a link to it in the show notes.
It's called Quincy's Market, a Boston Landmark. John Quincy Jr. and Northeastern University Press here in Boston published it. And it's an excellent summary of the colonial market system, but also the development of Faneuil Hall and Quincy Market. Because again, and this is how it relates, this is all part of where Haymarket is today, the Market District. So it was, in that time, one of the largest market complexes built in the United States in the first half of the 19th century, designed by Alexander Paris. And this is all on landfill, because where Faneuil Hall stood was, remember, Dock Square. That's where the docks came into. So as Boston expands in the 17th and particularly 18th century, land is continually filled in. And from its beginnings, the market was used largely as a produce and foodstuff shopping center with, various grocers of such goods as eggs, cheese, and bread lining its inside walls. And there are wonderful pictures that show those vendors, meat vendors too, in the market.
So what kind of goods did they sell there? Because today, if you go to Quincy Market, it's, Abercrombie and Fitch and all those types of clothing chain stores.
Yeah,
really.
and but that's an interesting part of its history, because the buildings may not have survived if that did not happen with the Rouse Corporation in the early 1970s. But after Quincy Market was built, the inside stalls, and again, just fabulous photographs. You had butchers in there. And I've got wonderful pictures. And that lasted, from its beginnings, from the time Quincy Market was built and opened in 1826. The stalls there had the meat vendors, had egg sellers, they had bread shops. It was really all the stuff that you needed. There were cheese shops and so on. So it was really vegetables, also one-stop shopping. Now, that lasted well up until the 1950s and into early 1960.
So, Ken, you have really provided us with a great overview of how the marketplace in Boston developed from its earliest days in the colonial period up to the early 19th century. And I wonder, now that we know how the market at Faneuil Hall, the market at Quincy Market developed, could you talk to us specifically about Haymarket and how Haymarket fits into the picture of Boston markets?
Glad to. So Haymarket is really an outgrowth of the Quincy Market Faneuil Hall. And that in itself dates back, as we've just discussed, all the way back to the 17th century, of that area being the central markets, because first the docks and so on. So what happened is, with Faneuil Hall and then Quincy Market, besides the indoor stalls, you had push cart vendors on the outside of Quincy Market. And because there was a huge, and there were wonderful late 19th century photographs that document all this, and you could just see how it was seething with people. The businesses along Blackstone Street and the whole Blackstone block served, Faneuil Hall and then Quincy Market. So shops, which we still have today on Blackstone Street as part of Haymarket, also catered to people coming in to buy fruits, vegetables, meats, and fish. So it was kind of a spillover of the original Faneuil Hall and then Quincy Market. So the push carts also, as I said, from 1852 is the first I can find so far, and I'm going to keep getting this back. They called it the Blackstone Market. But I believe it was there actually even before, just as spillover, these push carts moving down Blackstone Street, because it's right next to Quincy Market. So that's how Haymarket, I believe, came about.
And Haymarket really marries the idea of the established market with the age-old Yankee preference for being able to haggle personally with vendors to get a good deal.
Very, very much so. It has that feel, and it has that feel of some European markets that you might visit. And today, most people think of Haymarket as being, these Italian vendors. And in the 20th century, it really was mostly Italian vendors from the North End once it became Italian, and we know that that's transformed over the years to become an Italian neighborhood, and now maybe transforming away from that. But traditionally in the 20th century, Italian vendors in the North End who brought their push carts, which they sometimes rented and stored in buildings specifically for that in the North End, would pull them up on the market days, which are the 2 days, Friday and Saturday. Earlier in the week, they would assemble their produce, which is what happens today. And the vendors at Haymarket today get all of their produce from the Chelsea markets, and there are 2 markets in Chelsea, 2 central markets. And we document that in our online documentary on the Haymarket Project. And so the vendors, their week starts Monday or Tuesday. They go out and inspect produce at the markets in Chelsea. They have what they call houses. These are people that they go to. They all seem to have their own houses, the vendors. They select their food, and they will go back on Thursday with a truck, load that up, bring it to the market on Friday at dawn to set up. Markets actually, they start setting up on Thursday afternoons. The Haymarket now is protected legally. And there have been threats, as I've mentioned, over the years. When the central artery went in the 50s, that was a real threat, and that actually took down the buildings on one half of Blackstone Street. The market used to be on both sides of Blackstone Street. So what we're seeing is actually, a fragment of the market. And then, there was free parking underneath the central artery. I used to do that. When that came down, the challenge was what's going to happen? So the big dig comes. That disrupted Haymarket for the 10 years it was going up. But it was written into the agreement for the big dig that they had to stop on Thursday afternoon in that area to allow the vendors to come in and set up and hold the market on Friday and Saturdays. So they've survived, they survived the tunnel going into East Boston. They survived the central artery going up. They survived the central artery coming down with the big dig. And now still facing challenges with the development of the parcel just on the other side of Blackstone Street, Parcel 9, which looks like it will be a luxury hotel. Currently, this is where on weekends they have their trash compactors. There's also the Boston Marketplace going in, and that is going to be more of an upscale farmer's market that's supposed to be only locally produced goods, which should not be a threat to Haymarket. Haymarket today still continues to bring in immigrants from all over the greater Boston area who know that they could get good produce at very, very reasonable prices.
So it sounds like the Haymarket we can visit today goes back at least as far as 1852, but it has really strong links to that original marketplace that was established in 1635. So in 1852, they have the push carts, but if you look back through history, you have those vendors pushing carts and other through their wares through the city streets around 1635.
Yeah, that was, Blackstone Block, one of the, earliest surviving fragments of colonial Boston. The street paths are still there. They're laid out. The businesses that were there in the 18th and then 19th century all catered to Faneuil Hall, Quincy Market. So it's really, there's a direct, absolute link. Today, this is all called the Market District. Well, you know what? In the 17th and 18th century, it was the Market District too.
Ken, let's move on to the time warp. This is a fun segment of the show where we ask you a hypothetical history question about what might have happened if something had occurred differently or if someone had acted differently.
The time warp. Historians can't predict the future, but they can speculate about what might have been.
In your opinion, what might have happened if Boston had not been so urban or if the city had been further inland? Do you think the market would have started as it did? And if it didn't, how would the marketplace be different?
Really, really good question. If it had been further inland, a couple of things occur to me. I think it would have been different because mightn't the market have been closer to where the people were rather than the port? That would also impact costs because the transportation of getting things from the port further inland, I think, would have impacted the people buying it. And as we said, we're talking about good Yankees here. They wanted to haggle. They wanted the best price. So maybe the push carts, dating back to the 17th century in the European tradition, might have lasted, continued. We know they lasted for quite a while, surprisingly, into the 20th century. But maybe that would have been more the tradition. Or the other way, let's think about some of the great European markets. And the first colonists coming in the 17th century, coming from cities, would have been used to those markets. Maybe they would have demanded markets closer to them, so they might not have been in the same area that they are today, Quincy Market, Faneuil Hall, and Haymarket. Maybe they would have been further out. It's a good question. I'm not sure that the market would be the same. I think it would have been a little bit more of a hardship for people who were further inland to come down to the port. I think that would have made a difference.
Great. Now, before we conclude, if someone were to go to Haymarket today, what is your number one or two tips for experiencing the market? What is a must experience, or what should they, try and do while they're at the market?
The way to experience the market is go down there. I would recommend going earlier before it gets overwhelmed with people, because at some points you just can't move. So I recommend going down earlier in the market, and I recommend walking through, if you're going there to buy or just to look, walk through once, checking out the produce, checking out the prices, and then go back to whoever you think has the best looking produce and the best prices. Now, for the established shops during the week, I would recommend going and just exploring, because today there's a wonderful Hillel market there that has great meze, and you can go and still find a whole hanging goat or sheep in the back, and they'll let you see and pick out what you want. I also recommend the cheese shop, Harry's Cheese Shop, which was voted the best cheese shop by Boston voters this past year, 2014. And I find that, if you're willing to chat with these people, again, when it's not as busy, they're willing to chat and you get to know them. And that's something special about the market to me. I think that's a great way of experiencing it. Go and watch the people watch, check out the food, see what's freshest, see what's in season, and buy that. And you can find organic foods there too. I will tell you, it's something really to experience. Come this spring, Historic New England will be offering a food and tasting walking tour of the market, where we'll actually visit some of the shops, like the Hillel Market, the cheese shop, and the great pizza shop, but we'll also stop at the stands, and the vendors will let us taste what's fresh, what's in season, and also talk about some of their life experiences. So I think it's great.
You beat me to the punch, because I was going to ask you, when you were going to run that tour again, because that was quite the experience. That's how I experienced Haymarket with you. And I can tell you better go on an empty stomach, because you sample us with more food than, someone who's had breakfast knows what to do with. So where is the best place that people can look for more information about that tour and when Historic New England will be offering it?
On the Historic New England website, we have a listing of our programs, and we'll be offering them come this spring and through the summer and into the fall. So we've got, I believe, 4 scheduled, and I don't have the dates in front of me when I should. But you can find that on our Historic New England website, and also you can view the 4-part segments which trace the Haymarket over the 1 year.
Fantastic. And we'll include links to all of, the Haymarket Project, documentary videos that you have online, and links to Historic New England on the show notes page for this episode. So thank you very much for joining us, Ken. I certainly learned even more about the Boston Marketplace after our conversation with you.
Well, it was great talking with you.
Thanks to Ken, we no longer have to wander the grocery store and wonder how the urban dwellers of colonial America got the food they needed to survive. Open-air markets, market houses, and wandering peddlers served as the colonial version of our present-day supermarkets. If you find yourself in Boston, I hope you will take the opportunity to connect with the colonial American shopping experience by visiting Boston's Haymarket. As we have discovered, the Haymarket has a direct connection to the very first Boston marketplace, which John Winthrop and his fellow Bostonians built in 1635. The Haymarket operates every Friday and Saturday, rain or shine, and if you can time it right, I highly recommend Ken's tour. I think you will really enjoy the historic and food sampling aspects of that tour. I mean, I know I did. You can find more information about Ken, the Haymarket Project, plus everything we talked about today on the show notes page for this episode, which you will find at benfranklinsworld.com/019. And don't forget, the show notes page also contains historic maps of Boston, which will help you geographically place the buildings, markets, and street names we discussed today. Finally, if you had the opportunity to live in colonial America, would you live in the city or in the country? Please share your answers with me by sending an email to liz@benfranklinsworld.com or tweet me @LizCovart.
And remember, never leave till tomorrow that which you can do today.